Lightroom to Photoshop and back. This is a workshop I've been begging Laura for a while, so I really appreciate her indulging me with this one. And this is gonna be a pretty technical one. So if you're new to Photoshop still or new to Lightroom, I'm just gonna forewarn you that it can be a little intimidating at first, but hang with me because we'll do it a few times. And we have some things coming to you in email that might help with this as well. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to start in Lightroom, and I'm going to encourage everybody to import their pictures from their camera into Lightroom. Don't use iPhoto, don't use Picasa, don't use some other program. Use Lightroom to manage your files. Make it all start and finish with Lightroom. And it's just a beautiful process. I promise if you'll just try it. And I have won over people before who did everything in Adobe Bridge and they finally started using Lightroom and now they love it. But it was a bumpy start at first, so I'll warn you. But they got to it, got the hang of it, and love it. So when you plan on working with both Lightroom and Photoshop, the first thing you're going to do is look at your settings. All right. And so we're going to go, I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to go to Lightroom and down to Preferences. If you're on a PC, you're going to go to Edit and then down to Preferences. Okay. So Lightroom Preferences. And there are 6 tabs at the top: General, Preset, External Editing, File Handling, Interface, and Lightroom Mobile. And sometimes I'm just gonna, all right, making sure. There was some questions coming up, so I was concerned that people are having problems, but I think it looks okay. So we're in the external editing tab, and now your default, what Lightroom has it set to by default, might be just what you want. Maybe you've changed it, you've played around with it. This is what I have set mine to based off of, and I'll be very clear, my favorite Lightroom book, and I'm on my 3rd version of it. I had 3, 4, and 5. The Adobe Photoshop Lightroom 5, the complete guide to for photographers. It's by Martin Evening. Okay, Martin Evening, and I really, it's very thick and huge and a lot of heavy detail. So if you're new to Lightroom, that might be overwhelming for you. So anyway, the settings I have are what we've recommended in there. All right. So the file format, we have a choice between TIFF and PSD, and I just go with TIFF. It's what they recommend. It's easiest. You can use a TIFF on the internet. TIFF, it just works, although I do use JPEGs. But TIFF here is what we're going to take between Photoshop and Lightroom. You can do PSD. Color space. So we have 3 choices, and previously I had used sRGB, and the recommendation is to keep, if you're bringing it back to Lightroom, to keep it in ProPhoto RGB. We will export later and change it to sRGB, but for going between the 2 programs, it's best to keep it at ProPhoto. Bit depth. You can reduce it to 8-bit, but really you want 16-bit, and Photoshop has the capability for 16-bit, and you really just, max it out. Use as much as you can. Why reduce it down? So keep it at 16. This up here is for using with Photoshop, okay? Can you see it's little edit in Adobe Photoshop CC? Lightroom will automatically recognize it. I don't have to tell it. I didn't have to tell it that Photoshop was on my computer. It knew it. Adobe programs like to recognize each other. Okay, so the next one is resolution, and it was set to 240, and I changed it to 300, and the compression to none. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, if you have Photoshop Elements, this is where you're going to add it in. See where it says Application? And this is telling me the Photoshop Elements 12 Editor. I had to choose that. So here I'm going to click Choose. Okay, now this one was tricky. You got to make sure that you choose the editor, because if you don't, the option to come up between Organizer and Editor, and then you choose Editor, your picture never shows up in Elements. So you want to make sure that it's going straight through and opening up the editor without that in-between screen. So I just went to my applications, okay, Elements 12, and we don't want, we don't want this shortcut right here. We don't want that. We want support files, and then I clicked on the editor. And it might be a little bit different for how your files are organized, but make sure you're getting that editor exe file, whatever it is, You want to make sure that it gets straight to that and then hit choose. And then you're going to do the same thing, file format, color space. You can do 16-bit, but you might as well just do 8, and I'll tell you later why, but 8 is all that Elements can only handle 8. It can handle 16 to a very small limitation, and I'll explain that later. And then resolution. Compression, I really don't know why that was down to the other one. It should just be none. Stack with original so that when we make a TIFF, it's going to hang with the original file. And then you're going to restart your Lightroom, okay? Because whatever changes we just made won't be in effect for the pictures you're working on now. And most everything is okay, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to restart my Lightroom. On a PC, you have the option to restart. On a Mac, I don't have that option. I would need to just close my Lightroom out and restart it. On a PC, you're going to notice there's a restart button in the bottom left-hand corner. At least there is for me on my PC. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and tell you because I can't stand it. If you're busy writing down all these notes, we do have notes coming out for you in an email. So just take time to just listen. And if ever I don't have something in the notes, I will say, hey, this is in the notes. I had to write it on afterwards. You might want to jot this down. But we do have notes. So I want you to take time just to really listen and absorb and think about what's going on and not worry about busy writing, because sometimes you can miss stuff when you're trying to write something and then I've moved on and said something else. So everything I'm doing right now is really from the notes. Okay, that was all page 1. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and take some images to Photoshop. And I have some really old images, and then I have some images that you would recognize from last week's. And I'm going to, we'll start with this one, all right? So there's some different ways you can take your images to Photoshop. And I'm going to default to saying Photoshop for the most part. I will take one image into to Photoshop Elements. But for the most part, I'm going to default to Photoshop. And this is why. Because so many people because of Creative Cloud, so many people have moved from Elements to Photoshop CC. And so the number of people we have here with Elements is fewer than those with Photoshop. So I'm going to hang with Photoshop, but Elements users don't worry. We will get to that, and I'll show you taking an image into Elements as well. But pretty much everything's the same, except for when I tell you it's not. All right, so we can take multiple images or one at a time. Actually, I'll get started with this one, and I'm just going to reset it. Actually, so I've edited this one, all right? I edited just a little bit, and I'm going to sync this other one, and we'll hit sync, and I'm just going to check all and synchronize. Okay, so we've synchronized both these images for the settings, and they went from very cool to much warmer. They're still both highlighted, and now I want to, we may have had a break there because I just had the GoToWebinar bounce at me. Okay, hopefully not. So now I want to open this in Photoshop, and a quick way you can do that is just do Command E or Control E. Control E on a PC and Command E on a Mac. And it's going to open up my Adobe Photoshop CC 2014. Which is frustrating because I actually had an earlier version and it opens up half the time. So, I open it up. That one is not the same as that one. See the difference? I need to remove this one. And remove from dock so I don't accidentally use it again. Okay, so, and I haven't really played with this too much. So now I have this first image. Actually, I should be able to take both of them. It only took my first one, didn't it? I'll take that one too. Okay, so I have them both in here. I was hoping to do something different. Anyway, I had not tested that one out before I did this. So I have them both in here, and I can edit. I can use layers, use textures, do whatever I need to. So I'll just do some little things, play with the levels just a little bit. And, we can run an action if we wanted to. something like, reduce it down, something like that. Okay, so we have this. We have this edit. I can do the same thing on the other image, but for now, I'm just going to say, okay, I'm happy with this one. I don't have to flatten it in Photoshop. In Elements, you would need to flatten it. It does not like to carry over the layers. And it's not going to carry over the layers, but it doesn't like to save a TIFF with open layers. But here in Photoshop, I can. So I'm just going to go to File and Save. Okay? And it didn't give me any other choices. It didn't say, you sure you want to save this over the original? Anything. It did change from an NEF, see here at the file ending, to a TIFF. Now look here in Lightroom. There it is. There's the edit. There's the original, and there's the edit. It creates the TIFF. As soon as we choose to take it to Photoshop, once Photoshop is opening, in the background in Lightroom, it has created the TIFF. Now, when we save it, if you come over to Lightroom fast enough, you can actually see it change. And maybe I can make that happen for this other one. So here I'll do something, I don't know. Maybe I'll make it a black and white. So something very, not that one. Okay, maybe so. All right, it's too bright still, so I'd need to work on one, but I don't have time. So let's say I'm happy with this one, and I'm just gonna save it. And I'm gonna quickly go to Lightroom, and oh, there we go. It was too fast for me. All right, so you see how it did that. Now we can create another TIFF. I can take it into Photoshop again. All right. It will create another one for me, and we can do something different with it, or nothing at all. I mean, you can just decide what you want to do. Okay. So here, sorry. There we go. And it created the new one and applied the preset. I mean, applied the action. It made the change all at once. Usually it's creating the TIFF first and then doing it, but for some reason my Lightroom's being a little bit slow with this one. So then we have our different versions. Now, I don't know, normally I don't need to go to Photoshop to apply actions because I'm using presets and I'm happy with that creatively. The reasons I go to Photoshop primarily are to apply textures, replace skies, get rid of unwanted clutter in the background, because sometimes the clone heal is not that handy, all right, in Photoshop. So sometimes I feel like I need to go to Photoshop for that. Now, I just want to show you something very cool before we go to the standard, okay? So we're going to go cool, then standard. So here we have, it's a raw file. It's a Canon raw file. We've edited this image, okay? We can see where we've got brush. See all those brushes, those pins? Those are brushes, right? I don't know if we have any graduated filters. We don't, but let's maybe add one. Let's add something like, add light. I don't know, maybe I'll add a little bit of light like that. Just a little bit. Okay, done. All right, and really didn't mess with anything here, but let me just do something with it. Okay, so I changed that, got a clarity down, add the vibrance a little bit. So we made some changes. So now I'm going to right-click on the image, or you can right-click in the thumbnail, right-click, and then choose Edit In, and then go down to Open as a Smart Object in Photoshop. This works in Photoshop CS as well as Photoshop CC. It does not work in Photoshop Elements. Okay, here we go. It's coming open. All right. So we have our image and we have our background right here like normal. But you see it's got something, it's got like a little piece of paper with a folded corner, and it says, if you hover over it, Smart Object Thumbnail. Why this is so handy is because once we take it here, we could say, oh gosh, I really overdid it on the light. I can double click on the icon and look at this. I have all my same Lightroom settings right here. If I click on the brushes, my pins are there, so I could reduce one down so you can see where I brushed. You see the settings, I can reduce a setting. If I click on the graduated filter, we see the graduated filter. I might say, didn't really need that, or I'm gonna back it down or increase it. So that's what's so lovely about those smart objects is that your changes you made in Lightroom are accessible to you. So let's say, okay, we're good. All right, we're happy with that. And those edits were made with the Perfect Portrait brush set and some of the workflow set, okay? Clean Edit workflow, or the workflow clean edit. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, so now I can make some other changes if I wanted to do something like add texture or what have you, remove something, I could do that and then save it. So let's just do something. I'm gonna turn it into black and white because that's just so evident. All right, and we'll pull down the matte some. Pull that down, and it needs some light, doesn't it? A little bit more light. Oh, okay. Oh, it needs light. So what can I do? I can double click on the thumbnail again and come in here and just say, okay, I'm gonna brighten this image up because the action's gonna darken it some. So that's what's beautiful about those smart objects. You can keep going back into them and get that you have all the raw data accessible to you, all the settings there. So look how much that brightened it up. We want to look at our history. So there's before I went back into the raw data, into the ACR, the smart object, and then I edited it there. So I can go back into it. I can edit some more. I can add a texture on top of things. So let's say I want to add a texture. I can do File, Place Embedded, or Place Linked. Either will work fine. And do Dropbox. And let's do something like Worn Linen. And we're going to place it. I'm just going to squinch it up here. The check mark. Okay, so with textures, if you've never used textures before, don't worry. I've got very good instructions at Everyday Elements. The last blog post was 3 easy steps to applying textures. So I have the texture here. I'm going to change the blend mode. Here's your blend mode of the word normal and go down to overlay. Okay, and we can back that down some. So we added some texture. If I want to, this is going beyond the scope of this webinar, but I'm just going to show it to you very quickly. If I want to blur the texture right here, but keep the color, I just don't want the too much of the linen texture on her face, I'm going to right click and choose to rasterize the layer, and then I'm going to lasso some feather here. I'm just going to lasso this area. I would normally lasso all of her hair, but I'm in a hurry. And now I'm going to filter and go down to blur, Gaussian blur, and we're going to increase it to like 20 something. Okay, actually maybe a little bit less than that. All right. So now it blurred the texture. We don't see the texture as much, and I can show you that. So see the texture on her neck and face and hair. And now we don't have it, but it is on the rest of the picture. All right, that was really fast, wasn't it? And we'll do texture again in just a minute. So textures are something you really can't do in Lightroom that a lot of people love and enjoy. So you can edit your picture in Lightroom, bring it to Photoshop. And now I'm just going to go ahead and flatten this one. All right. And I'm going to do Save. We come down to Lightroom, and there it is. Okay, so that smart object is so useful because we can go back into it over and over and over again while we're in the edit process, or even if you save it as a PSD with the layers open, actually you can save the TIFF. So we could save the TIFF. Let me do that. I think, just come back here. Now I'm just going to hit save. It's really okay. Actually cancel. Let me do it with another one. You can save, so what I'm trying to say is you can save the TIFF with the layers open in Photoshop. Later, if you come into the file, if you come into Photoshop and you open the file again, open this TIFF, your layers will still be there. However, if you bring it from Lightroom again, the layers are not going to be there. So if I close this out and then reopened it from Lightroom into Photoshop, my layers are gone. I hope that's clear. So you would need to open it via Photoshop to access those layers again, but not come from Lightroom to Photoshop. This round trip is really a kind of a one-time deal, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Okay. All right. So the smart objects, you can access all the Lightroom changes you made. Now, let me do another one really quick. So this little fella, this is an old picture of mine, and I'm just going to use some presets to play around here. But I want a little more contrast than that. All right. I'm just going to play around. I'm looking at the navigator window to see what I want it to be. I actually kind of like that urban dark. Just need a little brighter. All right. Let me create a virtual copy. Okay. So, okay. So this is just a quick edit with the urban dark, I think, in the make matte. So it's just very kind of quick. I'm just going to use a brush to brighten up a little bit. Oh, too bright. Good example though. All right, so I'm brightening up here, but it's too much. So I'm going to turn it on its side, and make it compact, and I'm going to lower it down so it's not quite as strong. I'll just brighten it a little bit more in the center here. Okay, so you can make it compact by clicking the little triangle. See the dark black triangle? You click it on its side, and then you can lower the amount of the brush all at once. And oh, that overwrote the settings. Never mind that. So now I'm going to take it into Photoshop Elements. Take this one into Photoshop Elements. So I'm going to right click, and you can right click in the thumbnail, or you can right click on the picture itself. So I can right click, and I'm going to choose to edit in Photoshop Elements 12 and edit with the adjustments. This is what I want. And I'm going to take it in as a 16-bit. All right, see that? So you have the chance to change it here. 16 bits, and I'm going to do that. And you can see up here we got a status bar. So it's going to open up my Elements 12, and there it is. Now, see, I'm in my Layers palette panel, and notice how these are all grayed out. And when I hover over them, it tells me, oh, no, this is not going to happen. You can't do this. Well, why wouldn't those be available to me? Well, it's because I'm in the 16-bit mode, and I can't do any adjustment layers in that. Elements really doesn't work in that at that level. So we need to change to 8-bit, or you can edit on the background. So if we go to Image, Enhance, Lighting, we can do some things. We can edit on the background if that's what we wanted. But that's it. That's all we'd be able to do. So if you accidentally bring it into Elements as 16-bit, the way to change it, let me remember. mode, and 8-bit. And as soon as we do, our choices for adjustment layers come back. And we can have layers, whereas before we couldn't even have layers. So now if I want to add a texture, I can do the file place. That's just really an easy way to do textures. I have other ways I like to use do textures, but so I'm just going to peek through. Oh, I like that one. In place. I don't know if the colors are going to work so well, but we can change that later, but that's not for this. For this one, soft light. If you want a little bit stronger overlay, you can reduce that down a little bit. We can do things to brush off the texture on the dragonfly, to reduce, keep the color but reduce the texture. We can do all kinds of things, but this is not a texture workshop, so I don't want to get too much into that. But textures is very often a reason people come to Photoshop and then want to take it back to Lightroom. So now I'd flatten it. If you don't know how to flatten, just go to Layer, Flatten. It's really quick. And now we're just going to save the file and hit, oh, it should just save. Make sure it comes back. There we go. Did you see it very quickly change? It very quickly changed right in front of us. And so here we have it. And then again, the texture is too strong, but I do love the different colors in the background. I should have reduced it. I just don't have time. Maybe if I have time, I can go back and fix that. All right. So now, reset this one. Okay. I'm going to go through the process again because it can be a little complicated. And for those who are newer to Photoshop or to Elements, and so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the workflow presets, and I need to darken a little bit because this one was a little bit overexposed. Darken a lot. That's what I'm going to use, is darken a lot. A little bit of contrast. I'm going to soften it a little bit. The all-in-one clean edit doesn't work here because it was overexposed to start with. If your image has any problems, if it's severely underexposed or very overexposed, the all-in-one isn't going to work. The all-in-one was, they designed it for a fairly good straight out of the camera image that has good exposure. So that one's not going to work for me because it was overexposed. No noise reduction. Sharpen, a little vignette. I'm going to use a little bit of a brush, just a little bit, just to brighten just a tad. And I'm going to do new. Whoops. Turned it off, didn't I? I'm just do a little bit of add darkness. So I'll make this a little. Oh, baby darken. That's what I wanted. All right. No wonder this is not working. Does anybody notice what's wrong with this? This is an old picture. What do I need to do? I need to update the process. That's why my brush wasn't working. Okay. Let's do this again. See, I make mistakes too. And I'm surprised that, oh, because I'm using Lightroom 3s. No wonder it's still working. Y'all just let me, I'm losing my mind. See, I played with these on my PC, and then I sent them over Dropbox. And then I brought them in on my MacBook, and the update, the process had not come over. So it threw me off my. Threw me off my game. Okay. She still needs a little bit of darkening this time. So I'm going to do that. The brush. right? New. Grit, getting grit on the barn in the back. Okay, so let's say we're done. And I want to be able to access these changes in Photoshop. So I am going to open it as a smart object. So the Command E or Control E is not going to work here because they'll just open it like regular. It's going to be a TIFF. And I want to open it as a smart object. So I'm going to right click and choose Open as a Smart Object. All right. So now if I come in and decide, well, gosh, I wish I hadn't darkened up the area over here so much, I can double click. I mean, I can use adjustment layers. Yes, I can. Or we can double click, come in here, click on that a little bit, and maybe not darken it so much. So I'm just reducing that back down a little bit. Okay. Then we could add textures, or we could try and get rid of this hole. We could do lots of different things. And I'm just going to quickly, because we have some new Photoshop users, I'm going to show you the most crucial adjustment layer that if you have Elements or Photoshop, this one should be your best friend, and it's Levels. Curves in Photoshop is equally as handy, but the one that goes between both programs is Levels. And so the black here is your darkest area, your shadows, your areas of high contrast. That's where it's going to be. So if we pull it over to kind of meet the bottom of this little mountain, see how it added some contrast? And this gray slider, if we take it to the right, it darkens the image. If we take it to the right, it brightens the image. That's our midtones. So sometimes it helps to take that slider and just bump it a little bit to the left to brighten those midtones if your image needs a little light. If it's overly bright, then pull it a little bit to the right. And this white slider, I almost never touch this. This is our highlights. And we don't want to brighten those up so much we blow it out. See that? So I typically leave that alone and brighten with my gray slider instead. So that's Levels. You can change white balance with this. You can do so much. You can access the color channels. So learn to love Levels. In fact, if you go to Everyday Elements, there is a $10 workshop with great notes, I think 8 pages of notes on learning to use Levels. So that's fantastic. But that or curves should be your best friend in here. Okay. So now if I wanted to, let me do something else that's kind of, the only reason I'm coming to actions is so you can see that there was a change. So you can see that when we pull it back to Photoshop, I don't know why some of those are doing that. Oh, this one's not wanting to behave. All right. And that is not what that one normally looks like. So I'm just doing this so you can see what, when we take back to Photoshop, there was a change, okay? And now we can just do File, Save. And there it is. And I'd already had a previous one too. Now, I want to show one more thing really quickly. Those are JPEGs. Okay. Now these are images that have already been edited, and these were turned into JPEGs on export. Very quickly, I did in a webinar last week. So I'm going to take one of these to Photoshop, and I'm going to show you something neat, all right? So I'm going to do Command E or Control E. I'm going to edit with a copy. Because it's a JPEG, I'm being asked this. So I'm just going to choose Edit a Copy with Lightroom adjustments, even though I have none. But that might be Yeah, that one did have it because that was not an export. That was actually just a JPEG image, not a RAW file. Okay, so I'm in Photoshop CC with a JPEG. See right here, it's a JPEG. What's neat about CC is that Photoshop CC, this does not apply to Photoshop CS or to Elements, I'm sorry, but Photoshop CC, we can access Adobe Camera Raw as a filter at any point in time by going to Filter and then Adobe Camera Raw. So now here I can, do things, normally this is an edited image, but if we needed to tweak this at all, we could do it. And ACR in Photoshop has all the same capabilities as Lightroom. So if you're in Photoshop doing something, you're like, gosh, I really wish I had the brushes of Lightroom. Well, there's brushes in ACR. So you could come in here and tweak and play around and do whatever you need to do, or graduated filters, because I will tell you, I love graduated filters to no end because the effect is applied gradually, right? And I want to, well, I don't know why, usually if you double click on it, I'm just going to bring most of these back to normal. I'm just going to add a little bit of light from this side. And that's why I love graduated filters, because it starts strong and gradually slopes off like an actual lighting effect. So for evening out light, adding light or darkening, I love graduated filters. And yes, we can kind of simulate that in Photoshop, but not as easily, truthfully. And so I love that you can use ACR filter in Photoshop CC on a JPEG or a RAW file. Now, so once I hit OK, the thing is, it's not like it's a layer. We can't suddenly go back, to that layer and change it. It's going to apply it to the background. And here's the other caveat. Remember how when we brought over this picture, and I brought it over as a smart object, or this picture, and we're able to access the Camera Raw. Let me do this again. As I'm opening it as a smart object, I think it helps to show it instead of me just saying it. Okay, so if I double click on it, it has my same settings as in Lightroom. If I click on the brushes, it shows me where my pins were, just like in Lightroom. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to close it out. I don't want to save it. Now I'm going to do the same picture again, but this time I'm just going to choose to edit it in Photoshop by doing Command E or Control E on a PC. I know this is really technical. Hang with me. Okay, so now we don't have the smart object icon, and if we choose to do the Camera Raw filter, which it's up here because it's the last filter we used, but it's down here, Camera Raw filter, my settings are not there. Do you see that? And my brushes are not there. So it's not that it's accessing the same exact data. It's not accessing this file's raw data. It's just giving us the capability to use what's in ACR. Is that clear? The only way to access the exact raw data and the exact changes made in Lightroom is to bring it over as a smart object. Where the Camera Raw filter comes in handy is if you have a JPEG, okay? If we have a JPEG. And this image, there we go, there's the raw file, but it's still a JPEG. It's still a JPEG. So I'm going to edit it in in Photoshop. Here's the original. It's a JPEG. But if I do Camera Raw filter, I can use ACR, but I'm not accessing any raw data because it wasn't a raw file. It was a JPEG. But still, ACR is so super handy, just like Lightroom, that we can use the graduated filters, we can use adjustment brushes, we can do overall clarity. We can do some of these wonderful things, and the camera raw filter gives you that capability. That's only in Photoshop CC, but I think it's so handy. I really wanted to make a point of showing that to you. All right. So that was pretty techy, and I didn't teach much with Lightroom, except for now we're going to export these really quickly. And I'm going to just grab the ones that I made changes to. Okay. And I'm going to export. And so I could do the same thing for the blog. I can use a preset to change my settings, or I could change them to do something. So here I can make it whatever I want to make it to. Go to my desktop and choose the folder, whatever. So here I've got it going desktop, interesting, and I can do web. And it's reducing the quality and the file size because it's for a blog, sharpening for screen, and it'll make all new images. And I could watermark and just do something quick. So I just did this quick. Okay. So our images that we took from Lightroom to Photoshop, brought them back to Lightroom so we could do all of our exporting at once. All of the exporting at once. Again, none of these were edited superbly in Lightroom, except for this one last week. That was last week's, one of last week's edits. Okay, and that was done exclusively with the Perfect Portrait and only a few of them. So if we did our brushes, you would see it was just a few brushes that made this fantastic edit. Perfect Portrait collection. And the texture we used here, I can't remember which one it was, but we used linen on this one, and you're not seeing it before and after, but looks very nice on this particular image. I love the linen texture. And so those were from the Retro Revival textures, I believe, at Photographer Depot, and they are really, really beautiful textures. And hopefully you quickly saw how to use them. All right, so time is of the essence, so I am taking a few questions. All right. So there's only a few questions. Let's throw some more at me, okay? I'm not able to change anything under the external editing tab under preferences. That is odd, Bobby. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to change it, because you should be able to. I mean, I'm not real sure. I've not had that problem. When you update Lightroom, when you lose anything, I'm scared to do it. Nope. If there's a new version of Lightroom, like 5.4 or whatever, go ahead and update. You won't lose anything. I have updated so many times with 3, 4, and 5 and never lost a thing. Okay. Have you done some editing to these photos prior to exporting Photoshop? Carrie, only this girl's picture right here. This one right here. Whoops. That one had been edited last week. Other than that, and I think I warmed up my son's picture, this one, and I showed that in the webinar where I think I warmed it a little bit and then took it there. But no, this was more about learning to take the whole process, because I have talked with people in the past who tell me this crazy system they have. Okay, they import with Picasa, and then they bring into Bridge, and then they choose the files they're going to edit, and they bring them into Lightroom, and they edit to them, and then they might edit them in Photoshop again, and then they're going to have to try and save them all, and then they want to bring them back to Lightroom, and then they'll re-import them, because they didn't take them. It's like they exported them in Lightroom to take them to Photoshop. You don't want to export. Do you see? The only time I exported was when I exported the changes. I didn't export and then take the Lightroom to Photoshop. I took them from while they were in Lightroom straight to Photoshop. I did not hit the export until the edits were done, and they weren't really done. I just didn't have enough time to do a great edit, and we already had this beautiful one from last week, so I used that one. So make sure your system, because people are losing time, so much time, jumping from here to there to there to there. Start in Lightroom, take a few images that you feel like really need help into Photoshop, bring them back to Lightroom. Just by hitting File, Save, they'll pop back up in Lightroom, and then you can export. So you have a uniform look, and you can export them all at once into the same folder, that kind of thing. There are times when I export first and then open in Photoshop, and do you know when that is? That's when I want to make a collage or something, or an album. So I'll export the images so that they'll fit the album. I mean, not perfectly, but I resize them, especially, you know, if it's like for blog collage. If it's a collage where and it's going to go on the internet, I'm going to go ahead and resize those pictures to be internet size. Then I open them up into Photoshop and place them into the template. I am trying to learn more about the look side of Lightroom so that I can do that more here, and not necessarily even the book, just the templates inside Lightroom. But for now, sometimes I will export a series of pictures that are going to go in a collage. Or when I did the wedding I shot a few years ago, I exported about 80 pictures and opened them and created an album in Photoshop Elements because it was just very handy to use the project bin, and open up the templates, and I could pull in from the project bin. But that's the only time I would export a group of pictures and then open them up in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. I know that was more than you asked, but I felt like it kind of went straight into it. Okay, Debbie asked a great question. Will save overwrite the original? Nope, Debbie, it's creating a new TIFF. So as soon as we choose, let me see if we can see it happen here. So let's do this one. And all right, so this is one we edited last week. And I am going to right click and choose Edit In, and we'll choose Photoshop Elements. Okay. As soon as we do, see the file format, it's going to create a TIFF in Lightroom. Okay, so it's creating it. Preparing file for editing. Okay, there, it brought it over. And see my file name? I don't know why it called it Faded Linen. Oh, that was the name of the preset, I think. Anyway, so here is our TIFF, but our original is still safe and sound right in here. I don't even know why it named it that. That was strange. But there's our original. So, and the TIFF. So we have both down here. They've thrown them to the front of the thumbnail, the film strip. So we've got both sitting right here. We've got the TIFF and the original, which somehow I had named. It's named Faded Linen. See that? I don't know why. All right. Must have been the preset name. I named it that. I don't know. It's not my picture. So as soon as we make a change, the original is left alone. Lightroom is all about non-destructive editing. And I should have said that at the outstart of this, that when you take an image to Photoshop, they're going to create a whole new file, and it's never going to overwrite that original, because that original is so sacred in Lightroom. They're going to protect it at all costs. And it creates a new file that those changes in Photoshop, whether it's a new sky, whether it's a texture, whether you're cloning out something in the background, like, you know, something back here, whatever it is, adding an action, merging pictures together, because sometimes people make landscapes by merging in multiple pictures, and that's something that Lightroom can do. Let me see. If I can go to it. Anyway, let me finish the question. There is a photo merge option, like you can, and it brings all those pictures into Photoshop and will stitch them together. So anyway, it's not touching the original. Great question. Can we reset in Photoshop back to the original image that we brought from Lightroom? You mean, okay, so this is Jennifer Gray. Can we reset in Photoshop back to the original image that we brought from Lightroom? You can. Let's say so you imported the picture, you made some changes, you brightened it, you added a vignette, you used some brushes, and then you took it to Photoshop. You can reset, and then you made some changes in Photoshop. You can go back to ground zero in Photoshop as how it came into it, but you can't go back to ground zero of before you made changes in Lightroom. Let me make sure that makes sense. Let me show you. So I'm in Photoshop here. I can come back to how I brought it in by going to the history. If you don't see your history panel, go to Window and then History. And if you just click on the very top one, so if it's long, just scroll up and then click on this first one. So this is how it came into Photoshop. Let's show another one. That's how it came into Photoshop. So yeah, you can go back to ground zero in terms of how it first came into Photoshop, but I can't undo what was done in Lightroom. Actually, I can if it's a smart object. I could come in here and tweak the everything and go back to camera raw defaults, but I'm not going to do that. But that's only if it's a smart object. The other ones, you can only go back to how it came into Photoshop. Great question, though. Okay, I told y'all this is a really techie one. Okay. The file names change each time back and forth. Okay, the file name will stay what it is, and then they'll add edit.tiff at the end. And I'm sorry, it's a TIFF with one F. Sometimes TIFF has two Fs, and in the notes I have two Fs, and I'm sorry. But they'll just add edit at the end and .tiff. So the file names really shouldn't change. If you're talking about me getting flummoxed by that linen thing, that was just the file name of it. I don't know how that happened. What's the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit? And Kelly, I really used to know the answer to that. But it's been a while since I've been asked it or even had to think about it. And somebody here may already know. And so if somebody knows, put it in the thing and I will read it out. But it has to do with the colors and how much color you can access, if I'm right. But Elements is only 8-bit, and then Photoshop is 16-bit. And I will tell you that a lot of my edits, because, in Photoshop people are going to throw stones, but a lot of times I feel like Elements is a little more user-friendly. I'll just go ahead and take something into Elements, do my clutter removal or what have you, do my other things, bring it back, and then ship that picture off for print. I've not been unhappy. I mean, you really can't tell my Elements pictures from my Photoshop pictures. So, maybe for the very highly trained eyes it matters, but for me it doesn't. But all that said, if you had Photoshop, stick with 16. If you have access to more, use it. But if you have Elements, and I don't want you to feel unhappy you only have 8-bit, it's really okay. Okay. When exporting, do you always export both images, as in the raw that is still in Lightroom and the TIFF from Photoshop? Nope, typically. So again, the only reasons I ever take to Photoshop, ever, is I have to do some type of cloning. Like when I did the wedding, my second shooter took pictures, and she did a great job, but she took pictures of the groom and the mom, and there was this wire hanging below them, behind them. And it went through their heads, behind them. So I had to take those pictures. There's 3 of them, and I took them to Photoshop, cloned those out, and Photoshop Elements, and then brought them back to Photoshop. I'm always going to have an extreme purpose why I'm going to Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. I'm going to add a texture. I'm going to clone, or I'm going to run a specific action for whatever reason. But really, for creatively, I do stay in Lightroom for most of that. But adding textures, replacing skies. So if a sky is really blown out, and the overall image will be enhanced by me replacing the sky, and hopefully we may do a webinar in the future on that, but like September, October, November, then that's going to go to Photoshop and come back. I'm always going to export the best one. I'm never going to export the original that's so-so and the one I enhanced in Photoshop. So I always export those TIFFs. And the way you can find those TIFFs is with filters, which I've talked about in another Lightroom. In another Lightroom thing. So if you have a big catalog, let me show you that. Laura's going to shoot me because it's getting super complicated here. But hopefully she loves me enough to indulge me with this. So let's go to the library. Okay, so let's imagine this is a really big collection, because I've got it a collection. And let's imagine there's 100 pictures in here, and I only want to export the TIFFs. Say I took them all to Photoshop for textures or what have you, and I want that. So what I can do is use a filter. And so now I am going to choose a filter, and what I want right here to, not the label, I want the file type. So, I should have some tips here. All. There we go. So these are my tips. And so imagine it was like a wedding and you took 50 pictures to add textures to them, whatever, and you want to export just those images. Then you can, use those filters. And I've done a webinar on the filters. We have a blog post coming up on using the filters. So you can sort through your collection and only find those TIFFs and then export those. I know that's more than you wanted to know, but that is a really quick way of identifying the pictures you want to export. Okay, how do I, preferences to Photoshop. Can you demonstrate again? I have Photoshop CC, external editing, the second tab. Okay, so if you have Photoshop, don't worry. Don't worry about that. Lightroom will find it. At least it's always found mine. I've never had to tell Lightroom I had Photoshop. So the question was about the preferences and external editing. Lightroom has always just seemed to find mine. So if it's not showing up in your external editing, how about this? Just take a picture and do Command E as an edit or Control E if you're on a PC and see what happens. See if it doesn't find your Photoshop, okay? If for some reason it is not finding your Photoshop, which would be very strange because I've had numerous computers and laptops and it's always found it, but if it doesn't, so come down here to Additional External Editor and Application and hit Choose. Navigate to wherever your application is. So you can see my Photoshop CCs right here, and then I've got the 214. And we want to make sure that we get it. So I would land on that and hit Choose. So that was, I see several questions regarding that. But honestly, if they are both installed on your hard drive, Lightroom should find it. It's always found it on mine. So hopefully I'm right for everybody else. Okay, Anita, do the changes stay listed in the history? Oh, I'm past 6 o'clock. Okay, they do in Lightroom and they don't in Photoshop. Great question. So if you look at, and I could answer questions all day long. Laura knows that I could go on forever. So if we look at our history, this will only do about 50 states, whatever I have told it to do in my preferences. And I think it's in performance. Yeah, so I have 50 history states. Okay, y'all wondering how I got to that? It's in your preferences. So on a PC, it's under Edit, Preferences. On Mac, it's Photoshop, Preferences. You're going to go to Performance, and I have 50 history states. And you can make it bigger or smaller, but the larger you have for those history states in Photoshop, the slower your machine may, or your program may react for you. So less is a little bit better. So while the image is open, I have access to 50 history states. Once I have saved this file and closed it, once I've closed it, my history states are gone. Okay, so I can edit this. I can close it, and now I can open it back up. I don't know which one it is. Let's see. Nope, that's that one. I forgot what the file name was. Okay, so let's just open up. There we go. And see, my history states are gone. And this one just had the history states. It's got my layer because I'd saved it as an open layer. It's got the layer there, but my history states are gone. Lightroom never deletes your history unless you choose to delete it. Okay, 2 more questions. I really could answer questions forever. Okay, why doesn't Pretty Presets offer the text overlay so you don't have to go to Photoshop? Kirsten, however you pronounce it, my sister's name's Kirsty, so I'm predisposed to Kirsten. But Photoshop or Lightroom doesn't do textures like Photoshop does. Okay, so textures are generally JPEG files of actual textures, and you apply them in Photoshop. So you always have to go to Photoshop or Photoshop Elements for textures. You can do some grain, you can do some edginess in Lightroom, but for the most part, you cannot add textures in Lightroom. It's going to be happening in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. Okay. I have PS4 and Lightroom 5. Can I still do what you showed? Kiki, you definitely can. So just choose to edit. Your Photoshop 4, CS4 should come up. The only things you won't be able to do is that the camera raw filter won't be accessible to you, but I believe smart objects still should be. I'm not real sure, but I'm pretty sure that Photoshop CS4 can handle smart objects. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% positive. Okay. Okay, Amber talked about the programs duplicating. My Photoshop duplicated. My Lightroom did not. So that's interesting. You had the same experience. She thinks both her Lightroom and Photoshop duplicated. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. I'm probably going to uninstall my previous Photoshop and just because I have the Photoshop 2014. I showed that earlier on, Amber. You may have missed it, but I'm having the same plight you are. Okay, when I save an image in Photoshop, it's not showing my changes back in Lightroom. What am I doing wrong? Tiffany, I'd really have to see it in action, but other people have asked that same question, and you need to make sure you're just going File Save, not File Save As, and then come back to Lightroom and give it a minute because some people's Lightrooms are slower. It can depend on your the amount of internal RAM you have. Like I have 16 gigabytes, so my programs usually really fly, except for when I'm doing these webinars and then my Lightroom slows down for me. But I have a lot of internal RAM, so it moves faster. If you're working like 4 gigabytes or 2, it may be slower to show back up. But definitely like put in a ticket, and I wouldn't mind kind of taking a look and helping diagnose, and that way I can help others because that has happened. I know for other people, and I can't remember how we solved it because it doesn't happen often. Let's just do all file types. Okay. Let's take this one again. Develop. Let's just reset it. And low. I'm going to warm it a little bit. Bit of contrast. All right. And so say I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to take it to Elements. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do an Elements. Edit a copy. TIFF. ProPhoto RGB. I'm going to change it to 8 bits. It's remembering my last settings. Okay. So here I'm going to, I'm just going to do something. I'm just playing around here. Okay, and not a gradient map. Okay, I don't know what I was. Wanted to do something that we could see the change a little bit better. Okay, without adding a texture. So I'm going to flatten it and then do File, Save. Okay, now I'm going to ignore everything. It's wanting me to change the name and everything, and I'm just going to hit Save. It already exists. Do you want to replace it? Yes, replace. So now we come back to Lightroom, and there it is. There's the original. I didn't make a big enough change. And there was our change, and it's a TIFF. Did that help the Elements users? It's going to ask you to change that name or give you the opportunity. Don't change it. Then it's going to say, hey, are you really sure you want to overwrite it? There's already one existing. Yes, choose replace. And then it'll come up. It's already existing because Lightroom made one. And Elements is realizing there's already a file with that same exact name because Lightroom made it while it was on its way to Elements. It created the TIFF on your hard drive. Hope that helps. I know it's complicated, but I really hope more people learn to use the two programs together, Lightroom and Elements or Lightroom and Photoshop, because they really complement each other. And another good thing is a lot of the keyboard shortcuts, a lot of the things are the same. So Adobe has tried very hard to make it so that you can learn one and then make it easier to learn another. Let's see. Can you explain TIFF versus DNG? This will be our last question, and that's a great question, Kelly. So a DNG, she's asking, what's the difference between a TIFF and a DNG? A DNG is a digital negative, and she says she always imports in DNG. And I do too. I always import, well, you'll see my old files were NEFs. So I didn't do it my first couple of years, but the last few years I have definitely done DNGs. And what that means, so let me go to import. So here we have add, move, copy, and copy as a DNG. If you shot in RAW, all right, and you have like a .cr if you're a Canon, that's your file ending, or .nef if you're a Nikon, or if you're Sony, I can't remember what that one is, or Pentax, you'll all have a different RAW file delineation. Okay, it'd be something different at the end of your RAW file name. During import, you can copy it as a DNG instead of just copying over the regular RAW file. And I don't have anything to copy because I just don't right now to copy over as a DNG. DNG stands for digital negative, and it's still a raw file. So let me, and I want metadata. That's what I want. And I want file type, digital negatives. So these are all digital negatives. And let me just take one of these, and I'm going to edit it as a smart object. So you see, this raw file, the DNG, is still giving me the opportunity to edit it as a smart object in Photoshop, just like it would a regular raw file. So DNGs are still raw. They're just a generic raw raw format. They're not specific to the brand. .cr is specific to the brand. .nef is specific to Nikon. But .dng is just generic digital negative, and it's a raw file, and it's a little bit smaller than the raw file you imported, just a little bit. And what's nice is you don't have any of the XMP sidecars. You don't have any little extra file hang along. All of it is saved with it. So if we come in here, I can access the raw data. So we see my temperature is 5050 and my tint was 3. That's the raw information. This is the image straight out of the camera. And I can access all this raw data because it was a DNG, just like I could a regular raw file. Does that make sense? A TIFF is like a JPEG, although a TIFF can have layers. So you can save a TIFF with open layers and open it back up. Or you can flatten it and save it as a TIFF. So TIFF, it's technical. Maybe I should do a blog post on the difference. And I think I may have years ago done one. The differences between the file formats of like a GIF, a JPEG, and a TIFF. But I just know that TIFFs go well between Photoshop and Lightroom, and that's why Lightroom offers that. It offers PSD and a TIFF. But then when I export, I do change it into a JPEG. Some people keep it as a TIFF. And I believe a TIFF can be shared, it can be posted on the internet, I think. And, but it's not a raw file. TIFF is not raw data. DNG, raw data. There's the difference. And I could have said that at the beginning, but I wanted to illustrate with this good question. So TIFF, not raw data, can be layers, but not raw data. DNG raw data.